Hello, everyone. My name is David Drever. I'm a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, or MVP, in the security and Microsoft 365 spaces. In my previous video, which is linked in the comments below, I said that the next video would actually cover the end user experience. And actually, I've decided to do something a little bit different first. I'd first like to demonstrate setting up an endpoint data loss prevention policy first, so that we can cover all of that in the next video, which we cover the end user experiences. If you're here, you've likely been to my website, but if not, please check out daviddrever.com. I've thrown the link into the video description, and you can see it on the screen behind me. This is a website I've had for over a decade. It's changed format and even domains over the years, but the purpose still is and always will be about being a source of helpful processes and tips. If you've never been there, please check it out, but hopefully there's something on this site that's helpful for you. Now, as I mentioned, this video is going to cover the endpoint side of DLP. I'll discuss the need for an endpoint DLP solution and how it can benefit an organization. And I promise in my next video, I'll show you the end result of this endpoint policy we create today and the cloud-based policy we built in my previous video. In other words, what the end user and the administrators are going to see. Now, quick disclaimer before I get into it. The screens and outcomes are going to be subject to change. Microsoft is constantly updating and upgrading the capabilities within Microsoft Purview. As a result, what you see in my video may change and may be different with the current release. I feel, however, that the fundamentals will be sufficient for you. In fact, I have older videos out there today that are still quite helpful. So having said that, let's dig into endpoint data loss prevention feature within Microsoft Purview. Before we dig into the policy itself, let's first have a quick discussion on what Endpoint DLP provides you. Why do you need it? Like a cloud DLP policy, the endpoint policy also helps to control the flow of data. It focuses on the data located on the device rather than that's shared in the cloud location, such as SharePoint or OneDrive. Like other DLP features, it also focuses on sensitive information such as financial information, employee personal identifiable information or PII, health information, things like that. You can actually define exactly what that DLP policy is going to be concerned about. If we look at this visually, let's say I have files stored on my computer that I work on locally. Just quick aside, this doesn't work for only locally stored data. That's just my example. Okay. Now, whether intentional or malicious, sensitive information is going to be moving to another location, such as a printer or a USB drive, or even your computer's clipboard. DLP's intent is to stop or at least control the flow of this data to these devices where necessary. And one last thing before moving on to the policy, let's first talk high level about the components of a DLP policy. I did cover this in my previous video, but just in case you missed it, I'll cover it here again. And feel free to skip this part if you've seen this already. A policy itself is a container for the controls you wish to enact. The policy itself contains the type of data you want to protect, whether it be content connected to Microsoft 365 resources, cloud applications, via browser, or even network monitoring. It also manages the template for which you will use to monitor data flow. Now, whether that be information categorized as financial, medical, private, or something completely custom. Finally, it also controls the policies that are deployed to these different locations. A policy also contains the rule. This is part of the policy that actually does something. A rule, in turn, has three main parts. The first is the condition. Basically, this is what the policy is looking for, such as content shared externally or restricted content shared internally. Basically, what do you want the system to watch for and in turn stop or control or alert? The second part is the action. What do you want the policy to do once it's triggered by that condition? Do you want it to audit? Do you want it to block? Do you want it to alert the administrators? This is what the second part is for. And then the final component is the actual notification and reporting. So you can have additional emails going to the end users, maybe additional emails going to a special administration view. That's what that third part, the final component, is for, is to control those notifications. So now that we've covered the basics, now let's dig into actually creating that endpoint DLP policy. For this first endpoint data loss prevention or DLP policy, we're going to assume your organization has its Microsoft Purview information protection labels, also known as the sensitivity label, deployed to your environment. For this example, your tenant is configured with 4 labels ranging from least sensitive to most. Those labels are public, internal, confidential, and restricted. You want to block any sharing of confidential information from leaving your organization. However, you do want your users to be able to override this for true business cases where necessary. In this instance, we want to ensure confidential data is not copied to a USB device. As you can see, we're sitting at the Microsoft Purview landing page. To access the DLP console, you click on the solutions, which is on the left-hand panel, and then select data loss prevention. You may already have it listed in the quick launch section of the control bar, but for now, let's assume you've never been there and you haven't been there recently. Next, we're going to click on policies. You'll notice I have a number of policies in place already. However, if you look at the mode, they're all disabled except for the one created previously to allow us to focus on the 2 policies created for this series of videos. To get started, we're going to click on the plus create policy button. We're now provided with options for the types of data we want to protect. The option on the right, inline web traffic, focuses on cloud apps and AI tools such as ChatGPT or network-based protections. We'll cover those another day. For now, we're going to focus on data connected to our Microsoft 365 sources by selecting enterprise applications and devices. Here's where you can see we select the template we wish to base our policies on. We have financial, which you can see focuses on various financial bits of data for different countries. Next is medical and health, which focus on things like the health card numbers and diseases and things like that. Then we have privacy, which focuses on various forms of personal identifiable information, also known as PII, such as driver's licenses or passports. Now notice that while I have one of these templates selected, I can change the country or region, and it will allow me to focus on only the items for that country. Enhance is only available in certain countries and provides more in-depth options, for example, the US Patriot Act. Finally, most policies are created using the custom template. This allows us to start with a blank slate effectively. So we're just going to select that one here and continue on. Next, we'll give the policy a meaningful name. For DLP policies, I prefer to use a naming convention along the line of target location - target content activity. I don't advise adding things like the action to be taken because those can change over time and you can't rename a DLP policy. For this one, I'm going to name it device - confidential content copied to USB. Device, because that phrase covers more than just a laptop. It could include any type of devices compatible with this feature. The description is completely optional. Update based on your own internal processes, but for now, let's just click Next. I'll discuss admin units another day. Leaving this as it is will be fine. Just click Next. Notice that Purview automatically selects all of the available locations at once. If you notice, by clicking on Microsoft 365 Copilot and Copilot Chat, all of the other selections are removed. This is because you can't have Copilot along with the other options. It's very focused when it comes to Copilot. So for this policy, let's just click on Devices. I can limit the devices I want to point this policy at. I can limit it based on the user or the device. If I click on Edit, a new blade shows up and allows us to scope to the devices. In the first section, I can either select specific users and groups, or I can select everyone except specific users and groups. So you end up with either include people or include everyone except certain people. I can also target those users on specific devices or all devices. So think of it this way. To target users on shared devices, specific users across all devices, or any combination of these options. Let's cancel here because I want to target everything and everyone. Click Next to move into the Rules section. And because we're creating custom rules, just click Next again. At this next screen, we'll see the rules that have been built into the policy. As this is a new policy, we obviously don't have anything here at the moment. So let's create the first rule. To get started, click on the Create Rule button. One thing about DLP policies that I may not have explained in my last video is that all rules require a name. You can't have the same rule name in a single policy, but you can have the same rule name occurring across multiple policies. This is very important to be aware of and plan for. The reason being is a lot of reports in Purview show the name of the rule and not necessarily the policy or the policy in the rule. So if you reuse names or have similar names in each policy, it may get confusing. In this case, I'm going to put it in the name confidential content copied to USB. Next, click on Add Condition. We're going to select the option Content Contains. This is actually a bit misleading as the activity sounds like it is scanning the content of the document. Some may feel this is misleading because the confidential label is part of the document, but not actually contained within the content. However, it could be argued that since the sensitivity label is part of the file's metadata, it is in fact contained within. Either way, this is the option we want. You don't have to add a name to the Content Contains group box, but it may be helpful for others if they're reviewing your policy. So I'll type the group name sensitivity label is confidential. Next, click on Add and select Sensitivity Labels. The available sensitivity labels in the tenant will open up in the blade. Select Confidential or whichever one suits your needs, and then click Add. So now that we have our conditions set up, let's tell the policy what we want it to do. Click on Add an Action. Because we want to control the flow of data to the USB drive, we'll select the option Audit or Restrict Activities on Devices. You'll have to scroll back up here. For some reason, the screen takes you to the bottom of the Audit and Restrict control box instead of the top. But notice all of the options available. If you reviewed my previous video, you'll notice quite a difference than what we saw before. There are options for blocking browsers, clipboard, printers, but in this case, for this policy, we're going to focus on the USB device, so you can remove the check marks for the other devices and ensure the USB device one is selected. There are a number of other options to consider here as well, and I'll cover those in a future video or two. You also want to select what the system does when it flags a rule. You can see we have a number of options from audit to doing absolutely nothing or off. In our case, we want to block with override. Now I can decide how I'm going to let my users know when they perform the action I don't want them to do. So I'm going to enable user notifications. We also need this if we want to allow the user to override the DLP block. We do have the option for both Microsoft 365 and endpoint devices for this policy, but I want to focus on the endpoint devices only. So place a check mark beside Show Users a Policy Tip Notification when an activity is restricted. This is turned on when you select Block for an activity in Windows to turn off the notification on Windows devices, disable the restrictions. It's a long name for that checkbox. We can also customize the notifications, so click that box. Provide the notification window a title, some content, and if you want, a hyperlink. This is often to a help page for the data classification program. Once the notification is built, we can move on. We also want them to justify this. Remember, all justifications are added to the audit logs so they can be reviewed. You can now customize the alerts that are generated and incident reports if you wish to have those provided to analysts or admins. But ensure you do not turn off the send alert to admins, or else no alerts will be generated in the Purview console for tracking. We can leave the rest of the options as default and click Save. Notice the policy now gives us a summary of what is happening in the rule. Click Next. The final step is to configure if you want to run the policy in simulation, turn it on, or leave it disabled for now. Usually when I run in simulation, I'm doing it to ensure that things are working just right, so I don't want policy tips to be enabled for my users. But that is an option you can select. For this policy, I'm going to turn it on immediately. And now we can move on. Here we have the final page in the wizard. It's a summary of the policy. You can review it and click Submit. Now that this has been submitted, we'll give it time to percolate through the environment, and I'll show you what the end user's experience will be in my next video. Promise this time.